everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second panel of today's conference. Today's panel is on the global arena, dilemmas in the shadow of the war in Ukraine. My name is Link. I'm a Neubauer Research Associate here at INSS, and we have four excellent panelists with us. Let me introduce them for you. First of all, we have Aarkadi Mill-man, Senior Researcher here at INSS, the head of the Russia program at the here at INSS. He was the Israeli ambassador to Russia between 2003 and 2006, and before that he served as the Israeli ambassador to Azerbaijan between 1997 and 2000. We also have with us today Dr. Zia Merael, the Director for Research and Programs at the Center for Historical Analysis and Conflict Research, and a Senior Associate of the Fellow of the Royal United Services Institute with its International Security Studies program. We also have Dr. Zוהל Ozoner, lecturer at the Department for Political Science and International Relations at Marmara University. And last but not least, we have Rami Daniel, a Neubauer Research Associate here at INSS as well, and a PhD candidate in the International Relations Department in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Welcome, panelists. We're very happy that you could join us. And before we dive into the questions, just a word about the time frame. Each of you will have around 3 or 4 minutes to answer each and every question. So let's dive right in with a question for you, Zia. And regarding the war in the Ukraine, could you tell us a bit about Turkey's core interests with regard to the ongoing war in the Ukraine?
I suppose we can conceptualize it with two key words to kind of capture two components of Turkey's perception and policies on Ukraine. One of them is containment, right? So the war in Ukraine has a lot of risks for Turkey, whether it is directly vis-a-vis its trade questions with Ukraine or with Russia, implications that might emerge, sanctions for it, whether it is on food security, energy resources, spillover of the conflict itself to other areas near its borders, migration waves, etc., or the pressures that it faces from Europe or the NATO alliance on taking particular stands. So one major driver of that has been containment, right? So how can Ankara can contain the risks of the war in Ukraine? And I think by and large, they've done an admirable attempt at trying to balance that, to balance all these kind of conflicting pressures and the risks and trying to find solutions to it from their own national interests. And the second cluster, which is the second kind of concept, is exploitation. So the first one was containment. The second one was exploitation, right? So every crisis is an opportunity in diplomatic terms. Obviously, for Turkey, the war in Ukraine also brings with itself economic opportunities, right? So if, like we've seen with the tensions with Iran, Turkey was able to a certain extent, exploit the sanctions brought on Iran by having other bilateral conversations with Iran. So Russia relationship does bring that on questions on energy, negotiations on other portfolios with Russia, but also negotiations with the United States, kind of reminding Turkey's geopolitical significance, repositioning itself within the NATO alliance as a sine qua non partner, and selling drones to Ukraine, providing other support to Ukraine, also building on that and seeking how it can maximize its place as a regional power in the Black Sea, in the Aegean, and in the East Levant. And I think to a certain extent, it has also done a good job in exploiting this crisis, right? Look at the pressure it garnered on Sweden, for example, and particularly Sweden on the accession into NATO, got meetings with Joe Biden and more positive signals from the United States, got a lot more compromises from Putin than Ankara was able to get before. So at the moment, it's all looking rather good. The question is, how far would these two areas, containment and exploitation, maintain a balance? Or would it be more risky as the war drags on or it unfolds in a different way?
Thank you, Zia. And let us broaden the scope for the discussion with a question to you, Zוהל. How does the war in the Ukraine affect Turkish perceptions vis-a-vis the changing world order?
Thank you. It is a very interesting question, actually, because all we know that the changing atmosphere in Turkish foreign policy, the making, is very connected with the Ukrainian war, because we know that before there was a kind of the problematic atmosphere, especially related with the close neighbors, the relations with the close neighbors. And now we have actually a kind of the changing the dynamic inside the Turkish foreign policy related with this Ukrainian crisis, because it's very close war threat at the borders of Turkey. And first of all, it is considered as a kind of risk from the perspective of Turkey, and it must be managed somehow. And in order to manage this, the threat, first of all, the regional dialogue is come as kind of the priority of Turkish foreign policy. And we observe actually in the practice, in the policy level of Turkish foreign policy, the impact of this, the worries. And that's why we see an active Turkish foreign policy in Ukrainian crisis in order to find a diplomatic base for realization of conduct between each conflicting sides. It is considered as very important base for the let's say maybe not resolution, but finding a kind of ceasefire. So we see also other worries related with world order. I need to explain that too, because we know that there is the competition between the global actors like China and United States, and Russia is in between. Somehow we see that the Turkey tries to find a place for itself to act a little bit let's say in autonomy. We saw this, the demand for autonomy maybe for a few years. So this demand found a place maybe because of the geography and the diplomatic capacity of Turkey. Now we see this Ukrainian crisis created a base for that, and Turkey used this to present how much roles, important key roles for the region, for creation of a kind of stability, at least in the region. Maybe not big, let's say words, saying big words is difficult, but we can say that Turkey plays very important role, at least for creation of conduct and the promotion of maybe multilateralism, bringing sides together. These are important parts of Turkish perception. So it can be seen like, that the perception of Turkey related with the risks and opportunities, both of them came together for Turkish perception, but it is not a kind of, let's say, opportunism. I think this is also very important to underline. Turkish intention in the region is really related with security worries, and Turkey has a deep hesitation about expansion of any probable conflict. That's why Turkey's diplomatic capacity is highly used to stop expansion of conflict. That must be understood sincerely, according to me.
Thank you, Zöhal. Now I'd like to bring into the conversation the topic of Turkish-Russian relations. We know that Erdogan was one of the few leaders to congratulate Putin, for his birthday on October. So my next question is for you, Arscadi. How does Russia perceive the Turkish position regarding the war in Ukraine?
The situation in which Russia finds itself today due to war with Ukraine requires a flexible approach to its relation with Turkey. Not least at all, the personal diplomacy of Vladimir Putin and Recep Erdogan, who managed to build a dialogue between them, determines the nature of these relations. And I would say that for the Russian establishment, Turkey is a partner, but not an ally. Russia has no unrealistic expectations connected with Turkey's allied behavior. Still, the awareness of the strategic partnership pushes Moscow to the constant search for a balance of mutual interest. In general, we can say that today, Russia is guided by three principles in its relations with Turkey. One, to treat with understanding the issues of fundamental importance for Turkey's security. Two, in advance but without unnecessary noise, to mark red lines and to negotiate a corridor of what is acceptable. 3, to use the mistakes of Turkey's other partners, especially the United States, to improve its position. In Russia's understanding, relations between the two countries are based on pragmatism and realism. But there is no doubt that the war in Ukraine makes Russia look for any opportunity to cooperate with Turkey. Given the isolation in which Russia finds itself, relations with Turkey are significant for Russian Federation. On the one hand, Russia is concerned, of course, about Bayraktar drone deliveries to Ukraine. On the other hand, in some aspects, Russia's dependence on Turkey does not allow it to pressure Turkey in this matter. Russia is dependent on the mediation functions of the Turkish president and his closest advisors, as well as some ministers. It matters related to the war in Ukraine, such as the negotiation process with Ukraine on various issues, for example, prisoner of war exchange and including a grain agreement. Russia's focus is also on energy issues. Russia is interested in creating an energy hub in Turkey to pump gas and oil to Europe, as well as the construction of the Akkuyu nuclear power plant being implemented on a build-on-operated model. Russia has also not lost hope that it can convince Turkish bankers to find ways of financial transactions to circumvent sanctions. However, I find it hard to believe that this is possible. From a political point of view, it is essential for Russia that Turkey, as a NATO member, maintains a more or less neutral stance on the war with Ukraine and does not join Western sanctions. To summarize, Russia will be much more cautious in its relations with Turkey to avoid disagreements and conflicts.
Thank you, Arseny. And also, another very significant actor for Turkey is, of course, the European Union. So my next question is for you, Rami. How does the war affect Turkish-EU relations in general and vis-a-vis specific member states in particular?
I will maybe start with a more general assessment on Turkey, and the way is based on what both Ziya and Zwoel said about the exploitation of the crisis in Ukraine to improve Turkey's position. And I think we have to remember that even in 2021 and 2020 even more, the relations between Turkey, the US, NATO, the EU were very, very, very bad. Issues of Turkey as a Trojan horse within NATO, tensions with the EU about the refugee issue, the Eastern Mediterranean, accusations that maybe Erdogan was using Turkish communities in Europe to intervene in European politics. All that created a lot of tensions between Turkey and its Western partners, various Western partners. And as Ziya said, the crisis in Ukraine created an opportunity for Turkey to change it, to improve its image, and even in some paradoxical way, using what was seen as a problem, the good relations between Turkey and Russia, as an asset in its relations with NATO. For example, when it says, when Erdogan said, basically, I have good relations with Putin, I can use it to bridge between the sides. It is, however, and even to react to what Ziya said, Turkey played its cards well, but maybe the positive effect of Turkey's intervention in the Ukraine war is fading. With the intensification of the war in Ukraine, this bridging role of mediation role that Turkey wanted to play is less well accepted in the West. A lot of frictions remain on the Kurdish issue, the issue of the F-16 between the US and Turkey, and considering your question, the issue of the Eastern Mediterranean that has become hotter in the last year remains an important point of friction. And we see that in some statements by US officials, by Turkish officials. Erdogan 2 weeks ago mentioned provocations from the West in the war in Ukraine. So the positive momentum that we had in March, April, May is already fading. Concerning the EU, there is a more middle term and long-term aspect that I just want to mention maybe, and it is the fact that with the war in Ukraine, with the boycott on Russia, a road between Asia and Europe has been closed. A road through Russia of gas, of rare earths, and Europe, for its economy and for its strategic continuation, has to find alternative ways. And we see that the European leaders are investing a lot in the relation with Turkic countries, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, in the last month. And this can give Turkey a straightened role in European economy, something that we saw with the COVID, when part of the industry came from China back to Turkey. Now we have another wave of events that straighten Turkey, a geostrategic and economic situation for Europe. Is going to be very interesting to see how political tensions and economic interests work together, or maybe one against another.
Yes, always an interesting question, I agree. Arkady, you spoke earlier about Russia seeking, reaching for Turkey's support, or at least a neutral stance in the war. And Ukraine also highlights the importance of having good relations with Turkey. Why is Ankara so significant for Kiev?
Yes, it's a sensitive question for Ukrainians and also for Russians because of this mediation role of Turkey. But after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Turkey really took the friendly stance toward Moscow among all NATO countries. It did not impose sanctions, maintained links with Russia, and continues close cooperation on many issues. This could not but raise questions in society and the Ukrainian authorities, who have seen Ankara as an essential partner in recent years before the war. Kiev's dissatisfaction has already manifested in various forms as public criticism, official protests, and calls to the Turkish ambassador in Ukraine. In the last 5 years before the wars, it's important to mention, Turkish-Ukrainian relations were developing dynamically because this cooperation was well aligned with the interests of the two countries. According to Ukrainians, Ankara saw the partnership with Kiev as one way to solve the main task of President Erdogan's foreign policy to turn Turkey into an influential regional power. And for Ukraine, Turkey became one of the few partners to agree to serious cooperation in the military-industrial complex, which was extremely important for Ukraine after 2014. After Russia occupied Crimea and part of Donbass, the question of army modernization was raised for Kiev for the first time in the years of independence from 1992. In this situation, Turkey, interested in Ukrainian drone engines, became a welcome alternative. Thanks to its close ties with the Crimean Tatar community, Turkey was Ukraine's natural ally in the Russian occupation of Crimea. And Ankara did not join the sanctions against Russia imposed after 2014, but still it helped Ukraine keep the topic of Crimea on the international agenda, helping to organize the Crimean platform and assisted in releasing Crimean Tatar political prisoners. The relationship between Ukraine and Turkey was based on, I will say, ad hoc and case-by-case cooperation. For example, in the production of UAVs, the construction of transport and infrastructure, grain trade, of course, solidarity on the Crimea issue, or the safety of navigation in the Black Sea. Of course, Ukrainian society, accustomed to Turkey being called the strategic ally, expected Ankara to condemn Russia more forcefully. But Turkish interest remains the same. For Ukraine, much has changed because of this war with Russia. The Russian invasion and its causalities and destruction have radicalized public sentiment in the country, forced the concentration of resources on a set of tasks somehow related to a confrontation with Russia, and increased Ukrainian demands on external partners. The pragmatic and neutral stance taken by many non-Western countries is often not understood by Ukrainian society, which wants to see an ambiguous support for its position against Russia. Turkey was no exception. Also, Israel was no exception. Therefore, it's not surprising that the Ukrainian reaction was negative when Ankara did not join the anti-Russian sanctions, blocked the accession of Sweden and Finland to NATO, started negotiations with Moscow on trade in national currencies, and the use of the mere payment Russian system, and so on. As a result, Ukraine stopped perceiving relations with Turkey as a part of its partnership with the West. The Russian invasion forced Kyiv to look at Turkish foreign policy more realistically. Ukraine and Turkey will, in my opinion, will remain partners, but more situational and pragmatic. The Ukrainian authorities and society will always question Turkey's position and reliability as an ally. Ukraine's growing dependence on the EU and the United States could reinforce this trend, especially if Turkey itself continues to drift further and further away from the West. And Turkey's equally situational partnership with Russia will hold back the development of Ukrainian-Turkish relations. As the experience of the grain deal showed, Ukraine is not against Turkish mediation either. Ukraine will not fully trust Ankara with the issues of war and peace, but will continue to cooperate with Turkey to maintain communication with Russia.
Thank you, Arkady. You mentioned Turkey, the issue of the accession of Sweden and Finland into NATO, and we know that some of Turkey's objections to their accession has to do with the Kurdish issue. So my next question is to Remy. First, if you could elaborate a bit on this subject and tell us about the other interlinks between Turkish foreign policy towards the Middle East and the global arena more generally.
So if we start with the Kurdish issue, especially, I would say maybe that Turkey didn't want the links between this issue and global tendency, and Ankara saw in a very negative way the intervention of the West, the growing intervention of the West on the Kurdish issue, and the growing support of the West to Kurdish groups that it identifies as close to the PKK and as such as terrorist groups. And then suddenly, after years in which Turkey and the West were on opposed position and even conceptions of the Kurdish issue, especially in Syria, which has led to a lot of problems between the two and sanctions from the West against Turkey, suddenly, as an indirect consequence of the war in Ukraine, Erdogan receives a very, very strong card in his hand, which is the issue of integration of Sweden and Finland into NATO, which has to receive the approval of all NATO members, and thus including Turkey. And Sweden is especially symbolic on this issue because Sweden has a policy of support for the Kurds in general. So Erdogan, by chance, I would say, or as a series of consequences, has a very strong card that he can now use in its struggle again and its fight against Kurdish movement in Syria. And that's what we are seeing now in the relations between NATO on one side, Turkish attitude in NATO on one side, and Turkish attitude in northern Syria. Actually, what is very interesting too is to see that the reaction of the US and of other NATO members to the last Turkish moves in northern Syria are much more moderate than what we had seen on earlier occasions. Turkey is saying that it will enter northern Syria with a ground operation against Kurdish movements, and in comparison to other events like that. The Western moderation, although the US administration has called for all sides to come down, the general Western reaction is much at a lower key than at other occasions. And to answer your question more widely, and I think Zwoel mentioned it, the fact that Turkey has a very strong regional policy and sees a lot of problems from a regional point of view. I would say that in its relation with the West, Turkey has for a long time tried to say it was the country that was a sort of a gate to the Middle East. And we see that in the last decade, it has lost a part of this role because of the tensions surrounding it, because of Turkey's new relations with Russia that were mentioned. The US have found better allies in the region. And now we are in a situation in which Turkey is trying to reconnect the two together. We are mentioning the Kurdish issue. I will just mention to finish also the normalizations that we see between Turkey and its Middle Eastern neighbors, and that are linked also to the relations between Turkey and Russia and Turkey and the West, because with these relations with Saudi Arabia, with Egypt, although it doesn't work that much, and with Israel, we see that Turkey is also trying to position itself as a more Western-oriented country than it was maybe a few years ago, when it was perceived as a factor of instability in the Middle East, very close to Moscow.
Thank you, Rami. My next question is for you, Zwoel. Regarding a different region, how is the war in Ukraine affecting the region of the Eastern Mediterranean in Turkish policy?
It is not only related to Turkish foreign policy. I think Ukrainian war created a very big impact on the world order discussions, because we know that Turkey has been always very important actor on the base of geopolitical considerations. If we remember the Cold War, okay, we are not living in another Cold War. I need to underline that, because in the last, let's say the months, we discussed a lot. Is it another war, another Cold War? Is it the second Cold War? But I'm not so much sure about that it is the second Cold War, but we need to underline that we return back to geopolitical considerations. It is sure that Turkey has a very unique and very special geographical position, and it is very important for any global actor. And Ukrainian war also in a very special place that gives a special importance to Turkey. It is let's say, by the Black Sea. And the Black Sea is somehow under control of Montreux Convention. And when we look at Turkey's preferences in Ukrainian war, it is very obvious that Turkey tries to follow international obligations, especially the Montreux Convention. Montreux Convention protects the Black Sea coastal countries. And when you see that, there is a kind of the protection of rights of coastal countries against the outsiders. So that means a little bit a contradiction with the other global actors who are considered as the ally of Turkey. But from another aspect, we know that the entrance of these other actors into the Black Sea may create a big mess in Black Sea. So from that aspect, when we look at, when I look at the Turkish foreign policy, it is very sure that Turkey tries to follow international regulations in a very closely and very careful way. And I need to underline that the Turkish foreign policy follows United Nations and let's say decisions, Security Council decisions, and the international regulations. So maybe we can create another connection. We are talking about the measures came from the European Union against let's say the Russia, and why Turkey is not a part of that, because it is not the decision of United Nations. So the Turkey is not obliged as an EU member. So it's not an EU member. Okay, you may discuss the issue from an ethical perspective, from other aspects. I agree, but from this the specific point, Turkey follows undiscussed, somehow very clear international regulations, especially about Ukrainian crisis. And it created this atmosphere, created a very special, the rise in Turkish geopolitical importance. That is very important for changing atmosphere in the, let's say, the discussions especially about the Eastern Mediterranean. When you look at the changing climate, it is very clear that somehow United States played a very decisive role. And when Turkey and United States had some disagreements, very deep disagreements, it may create some opportunity for the other actors who can describe themselves as the rival against Turkey. So, this is something normal. That's why I don't like this opportunism word in foreign policy. This is the foreign policy. It is the nature of foreign policy. States are acting for getting more interest. So it is understandable if the target is legitimate according to international law. So these are very important. And when we look at all these developments, we can see that the United States withdrew its support for the EastMed project. Actually, it is also not feasible from an economic aspect. It is very clear. We know that it was discussed so long. And also we see that in between the Greece and let's say Turkey, this discussion, United States had also another very important position. And we see the change in the discussion, let's say explanations of the US officials towards Turkey's role. So it started to change a lot. So we can say that in Eastern Mediterranean, United States plays a very important role. And another very important factor outside of Turkish foreign policy and Turkish standpoint, United States changed its position. When you look at let's say the impact of this, the war and expansion, threat of expansion of this war, United States preferred to solve the problems, especially for itself. When we look at the Lebanese-Israeli, let's say the agreement, it can be also considered a part of this approach of United States. So the resolution of the problems, especially with the allies or potential allies, they try to solve this, let's say, the problems to create a kind of consensus, maybe. So it is very useful for also US interest. It's not for the Turkish interest. So what is important here, the Ukrainian crisis created a better impact, let's say the good impact on, let's say the Turkish position in Eastern Mediterranean. I can summarize like this.
Thank you. So building on what you said about the US, I'd like to zero in on this important actor without whom a discussion of Turkish foreign policy and a changing world order would not be complete, of course. So my next question and last question is for you, Zia. Looking forward and considering the possible scenarios to how the war in the Ukraine will end, how do you see the relations between Turkey and the US evolving?
Yeah, I mean, all the comments that have been made are quite sensible and rational. So it's quite refreshing to hear such an informed discussion on Turkey. Look, I think the events or the changes in geopolitical context and the bilateral easing that we observed between US and Turkey for this year has helped us to contain the spiraling risk of a complete kind of breakdown of the relations between two states. And massive shifts in policies for both of them. Let's not forget, I mean, the number of commentaries coming from Washington even 8-9 months ago that the Middle East wasn't really important, Russia wasn't really important, it was about China, so Turkey didn't really matter, ISIS was not a threat anymore. So all of that has changed for US too, right? So geopolitics is back, NATO is back. I mean, even for President Macron, who bravely declared NATO to be obsolete. Now NATO is apparently really important, in case you missed. So that, I think, calculus also contained the risk in US-Turkey relations, but at the same time, it still left a lot of things unsolved, right? The mistrust between two cities, DC and Ankara, and not just Erdogan-Biden, but institutionally, politically, influential networks-wise, it's still there, it's deeply ingrained. So I don't think Ukraine changes that. I think Ukraine brought to the minds again that, look, this relationship is worth to protect, right? Let's not burn the bridges. But the question of S-400s, the question of North Syria, the question of what happens in East Med over Cyprus, which might be the other hotspot to pay attention to, none of these things have disappeared. But I think what is also good to observe in Ankara's perception is it is easing its polemical kind of let's pick a fight and take a bold stand kind of public communication to a much more calm, let's normalize, let's ease tensions kind of policy. Some of that is underwritten by its economic vulnerabilities, right? It cannot pay for any more diplomatic crisis. And the crisis with the US has cost a lot. Developments in the region. That's why Egypt has been the most difficult one, not really relations with US. Even reaching out to Egypt is underwritten by the need to undo some of the damage that Turkey has went through since the later parts of the Arab Spring. It's underwritten by economy and the Turkish domestic political context in lead up to the elections and the 100th anniversary of the Republic in 2023. That also brings vulnerabilities. In other words, domestic political context would lead President Erdogan occasionally to, again, take a strong stand polemically with the West, particularly with the United States. But at the same time, I think even for Ankara, even for him and his close-knit foreign policy circle, I think there is a recognition that there is thus far you can go as a middle power, as a regional power, in picking a fight and straining all your relations. It's now time to basically ease some of these and trying to balance this contradicting pressure. So to that end, I think the anti-Turkish views, which are very vocal in Washington, D.C., hasn't disappeared at all. And I think that it is there as an undercurrent. Yes, the F-35s are out of the picture, but maybe the Ukraine is enabling F-16 upgrades and maybe some other positive portfolios like that. But I wouldn't go so far as being a magical kind of solution that everything is back to an imagined good era, which there never really wasn't. Turkey-US relations have never been easy, but it was at a breaking point. Perhaps now we bought some time.
Thank you. I'm afraid this concludes our time for this panel. So I would like, first of all, to thank our amazing panelists for joining us today. Thank you also to viewers at home, and have a wonderful rest of the conference.